The unsinkable ship that sank twice. The universe has a notoriously dark sense of humor. In 1898, a little-known author named Morgan Robertson penned a novella titled Futility. It told the story of a colossal British ocean liner, the largest ship ever built, hailed as a marvel of engineering and proudly declared unsinkable by its creators. This fictional vessel, packed with the rich and famous, strikes an iceberg on a cold April night in the North Atlantic and sinks. Due to a criminal shortage of lifeboats, more than half of its passengers perish in the icy waters. The name of this fictional ship? The Titan. If your brain isn't already doing a backflip, let's fast forward 14 years. The year is 1912. The White Star Line launches its own marvel of engineering, the RMS Titanic. It is, at the time, the largest ship ever built. It is widely described by the press and its builders as practically unsinkable. On its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York, it carries a manifest of some of the wealthiest people in the world. On the frigid night of April 14th, it strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks. Due to a shocking and legally compliant yet morally bankrupt shortage of lifeboats, more than 1,500 of its 2,224 passengers and crew die. The parallels aren't just similar, they're surgically precise. Robertson's fictional Titan was 800 feet long. The real-life Titanic was 882 feet long. Both ships had a triple-screw propeller design. Both had a carrying capacity of about 3,000 people. Both sank in April. Both had lifeboat counts that were just enough to satisfy outdated regulations, but were catastrophically inadequate for the actual number of souls on board. Robertson's Titan had 24 lifeboats. The Titanic had only 20. The fictional ship went down about 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. The real one sank at a nearly identical location. When the Titanic sank, Robertson's forgotten book was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, with critics and the public alike accusing him of being everything from a clairvoyant to a conspirator. Robertson, for his part, brushed it all off. He wasn't a psychic, he claimed. He was just a guy who knew his stuff. As a former sailor with an intimate knowledge of maritime trends, he insisted he had simply extrapolated. He saw that shipbuilding was trending towards massive, luxurious vessels, and he knew that the North Atlantic in April was prime iceberg territory. He also knew that maritime laws regarding lifeboats were dangerously obsolete. He didn't predict the future, he just did the math. But even with that logical explanation, the sheer specificity of the details, the name, the cause, the location, the catastrophic loss of life due to lifeboat shortages, remains one of history's most chilling coincidences. A story so perfect, it feels like a cosmic punchline written in poor taste. The presidential deja vu. The universe doesn't just write jokes, it plagiarizes itself. The eerie parallels between the lives and deaths of two of America's most iconic presidents, Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, are so numerous and specific that they stretch the definition of coincidence to its breaking point. It's a historical echo that feels less like chance and more like a glitch in the matrix. Let's start with the basics. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 18 John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in exactly 100 years later. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960, again 100 years on the dot. Both men were deeply involved in the fight for civil rights. Both had their elections contested and were seen as controversial figures who brought a new, youthful energy to the White House. The family connections are just as strange. Both men were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson, who were both Southern Democrats. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon B. Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. Again, a neat 100-year gap. But it's the assassinations where things get truly bizarre. Both presidents were shot in the head on a Friday while seated next to their wives. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln car made by the Ford Motor Company. Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was born in 1838. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was born in 1939, almost 100 years later. Both assassins were known by their three names, a relative rarity at the time, and both names are composed of 15 letters. The escape and capture narrative is just as mirrored. Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and fled to a warehouse, specifically a tobacco barn. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse, the Texas School Book Depository, and fled to a theater. Both assassins were themselves assassinated before they could stand trial. Booth was cornered and killed by soldiers. Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby while in police custody. Even the minor details seem to rhyme. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy, and she reportedly warned him not to go to the theater that night. Kennedy's secretary was named Evelyn Lincoln, and she also reportedly warned him against going to Dallas. The coincidences are so dense that they've fueled conspiracy theories for decades. Skeptics correctly point out that with enough data points, you can find patterns anywhere. But the sheer volume and specificity of the Lincoln-Kennedy parallels feel different. It's a historical pattern so strong it seems to suggest that sometimes history doesn't just rhyme, it repeats itself, word for word. The king and his double. On July 28, 1900, King Umberto IV of Italy was having dinner at a small restaurant in the city of Monza. To his astonishment, the king noticed that the restaurant's owner, who came to take his order, was a perfect physical double of himself. The man's face and build were identical to the king's. Intrigued and amused, King Umberto struck up a conversation with the man. The coincidences began to pile up, moving from amusing to uncanny. The man's name was also Umberto. He, like the king, was born in Turin. He, like the king, was born on the same day, March 14, 1844. The restaurateur had also married a woman named Margherita on the same day the king had married his own wife, Queen Margherita. And to top it all off, the restaurateur had opened his establishment on the very same day that Umberto IV was crowned King of Italy. The king was utterly fascinated by this string of impossible synchronicities. He felt a strange kinship with his doppelganger and expressed his regret that the man had not been decorated for his military service, as the king had been. The restaurateur mentioned that he had served in the same regiment as the king, but had never received any honors. The king promised to make him a Knight of the Crown of Italy and invited his double to be his guest at an athletic event the following day. The next day, July 29th, King Umberto looked for his double in the crowd at the event. He was informed, however, that the man would not be attending. Earlier that day, the restaurateur Umberto had been shot and killed in a mysterious dispute on a street not far from the event. The king expressed his shock and sorrow. As he was conveying his condolences, an anarchist in the crowd named Gaetano Bresci emerged from the throng, fired his revolver 4 times, and assassinated King Umberto I. He was killed by a bullet to the heart, just hours after his identical twin in life and fate had met a similarly violent end. The story is a stark, brutal reminder that some coincidences are not just curious statistical oddities, but fatalistic threads connecting 2 impossibly parallel lives, right up to their shared, tragic conclusion. The Tale of Richard Parker. Life sometimes writes fiction that is far stranger and more horrifying than anything a novelist could invent. In 1838, the master of macabre, Edgar Allan Poe, published his only full-length novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The book is a wild seafaring adventure story that culminates in a gruesome scene of survival. The ship, the Grampus, is wrecked in a storm, and 4 crewmen escape on a raft. Adrift and starving, they make the horrific decision to resort to cannibalism to survive. They draw lots to decide who will be sacrificed. A young cabin boy named Richard Parker draws the short straw. He is killed and eaten by the other 3 survivors. 46 years later, in 1884, art imitated life with a chilling precision that Poe himself would have appreciated. The English yacht Mignonette set sail from Southampton, destined for Sydney, Australia. It sank in the South Atlantic, and 4 crew members managed to escape in a small lifeboat. They were Captain Tom Dudley, Edwin Stevens, Edmund Brooks, and the cabin boy, a 17-year-old orphan named Richard Parker. Adrift for weeks with no food and no fresh water, save for the occasional turtle they managed to catch, the men grew desperate. The young cabin boy, Richard Parker, fell ill after drinking seawater. Captain Dudley, seeing the boy was near death, proposed the unthinkable, that they should kill him and eat him to save themselves. After some debate, they committed the act. Parker was killed, and the remaining 3 men fed on his body. They were rescued just a few days later, thousands of miles from land. The subsequent legal case, R.V. Dudley and Stevens, became a landmark in English law, establishing a precedent that necessity is not a defense to a charge of murder. But for students of literature and the bizarre, the case is remembered for its ghastly echo of Poe's fiction. A cabin boy named Richard Parker, sacrificed at sea by his starving crewmates. The fact that a real-life tragedy would so perfectly mirror the details of a fictional horror story written nearly half a century earlier is a coincidence of the highest and most disturbing order. Mark Twain and the Comet. Some people are born at the right time. Mark Twain, the quintessential American author and humorist, was born with an almost cosmic sense of timing. He entered the world on November 30th, 1835, just 2 weeks after the appearance of one of the most famous celestial objects in history, Halley's Comet. The comet, which is visible from Earth only once every 75 to 76 years, was a major event in 1835. Twain, whose real name was Samuel Clemens, grew up with the knowledge that his life was bracketed by this celestial visitor. He felt a deep, personal connection to it, and as he grew older, he began to prophesize about his own death. In 1909, he was quoted as saying, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt. Now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." The universe, it seems, decided to grant his wish. Mark Twain died of a heart attack on April 21st, 1910. It was the very next day after Halley's Comet made its closest approach to the Earth on its 1910 pass. He came in with the comet, and he went out with it. It's a beautifully poetic, perfectly symmetrical coincidence that serves as a fitting epitaph for a man who saw the profound humor and irony in the grand cosmic narrative, the Jim twins. The debate of nature versus nurture is one of the oldest in psychology. Are we products of our genes, or does our environment shape who we become? The story of the Jim twins is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the power of genetics, a coincidence so profound it forces us to question the very nature of identity and free will. In 1940, a pair of identical twin boys were born in Ohio. They were adopted by different families at just a few weeks old and grew up completely unaware of each other's existence. Both families, by sheer coincidence, decided to name their adopted son James. One was James Springer, the other James Lewis. The two Jims lived separate lives for 39 years. When they were finally reunited in 1909, the similarities they discovered were staggering, going far beyond what could be explained by mere chance. Both men were 6 feet tall and weighed 180 pounds. Growing up, both had a dog named Toy. Both enjoyed woodworking and mechanical drawing. Both excelled at math in school, but were poor at spelling. The parallels in their adult lives were even more uncanny. Both Jims had married a woman named Linda. Both had divorced their Lindas and subsequently married a woman named Betty. Both had a son, whom they had named James Allen, though one spelled it Allen. Both men worked as part-time sheriff's deputies. Both were chain smokers who preferred Salem cigarettes. Both drove the same model of light blue Chevrolet. Both suffered from tension headaches, were prone to nail biting, and had gained and lost 10 pounds at the same point in their lives. They even vacationed at the same small beach in Florida. The Jim twins became subjects of an intensive study at the University of Minnesota, which looked at identical twins reared apart. Their case, and others like it, provided powerful evidence that our genetic makeup influences far more of our lives than previously thought. From our career choices and hobbies to our medical histories, and even the names of our spouses and children. It's a coincidence that blurs the line between science and the supernatural, suggesting that our lives may be written in our DNA to a degree we are only just beginning to understand. Anthony Hopkins and the Lost Book. The universe sometimes works in ways that are not just mysterious, but downright mischievous. In the early 1970s, the actor Anthony Hopkins was cast in the film adaptation of George Pfeiffer's novel, The Girl from Petrovka. To prepare for the role, Hopkins wanted to read the book, but he couldn't find a copy anywhere. He scoured London's bookstores to no avail. Dejected, he was waiting for a train at the Leicester Square tube station to head home when he saw a discarded book lying on a bench. He picked it up. It was a copy of The Girl from Petrovka. That alone would be a remarkable coincidence, a 1 in a million stroke of luck. But the story doesn't end there. 2 years later, during filming, Hopkins had a conversation with the author, George Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer mentioned that he didn't have a copy of his own book. He had lent his personal, heavily annotated copy to a friend, who had then lost it somewhere in London. Hopkins, intrigued, fetched the copy he had found in the tube station. He asked Pfeiffer if it looked familiar. Pfeiffer examined the book and confirmed that it was, impossibly, his own lost copy. He recognized his own handwriting in the margins. The very book that the author had lost was the book that the actor, desperate to find it for his role, had discovered on a random bench in the London Underground. It's a perfect, closed-loop coincidence, a story of a book that seemed to know exactly where it needed to be. The first and last man of the dam. The construction of the Hoover Dam was one of the greatest engineering feats of the 20th century. It was a monumental undertaking that cost millions of dollars, and tragically, dozens of lives. The official death toll lists 96 fatalities from various causes, from heat stroke to industrial accidents. But within that grim statistic lies a coincidence of stunning, tragic symmetry. The very first man to die during the dam's construction was a surveyor named J.G. Tierney. He drowned in the turbulent waters of the Colorado River on December 20th, 1922, while searching for an ideal spot for the dam. 13 years later, the dam was nearing completion. On December 20th, 1935, exactly 13 years to the day after the first death, the last official fatality occurred. A worker named Patrick Tierney, an electrician's helper, fell to his death from one of the intake towers. Patrick Tierney was the son of J.G. Tierney, the first man who had died. A father and son, bookending the construction of this massive monument with their lives, dying on the exact same date, 13 years apart. It's a heart-wrenching coincidence that imbues the concrete and steel of the Hoover Dam with a deeply personal and poignant sense of history. The Finnish twin tragedy. Coincidences can be strange, funny, or even inspiring, but sometimes they are just profoundly, inexplicably tragic. In 2002, in the small town of Rahe, Finland, a story unfolded that defies all logic and probability. A 70-year-old man was riding his bicycle, attempting to cross a busy highway. He was struck by a truck and killed instantly. That in itself is a common and tragic accident. But what happened just 2 hours later, on the very same stretch of road, transformed a personal tragedy into a national headline and a global mystery. Another 70-year-old man was riding his bicycle, also attempting to cross the same highway. He was struck by a different truck and killed instantly, less than a mile away from the first accident. When police investigated, they discovered the impossible. The two men were identical twins. They had lived separately and were completely unaware of each other's movements that day. For two brothers who had lived 7 decades in parallel to die in the exact same manner, on the same road, just hours apart, is a coincidence that borders on the paranormal. Police officers on the scene were quoted as saying it sent a shiver down their spines. There is no logical explanation. It's a stark, brutal testament to the mysterious, unbreakable bonds that can sometimes connect two lives, right up to their shared, inexplicable end. The Romanov Curse and the number 17. The fall of the Romanov dynasty is a story steeped in revolution, war, and bloodshed. But it's also a story haunted by a number, 17. For the last Tsar, Nicholas II, and his family, the number seemed to follow them like a curse, marking the most significant and tragic moments of their lives and their reign. The Romanov dynasty's rise to power began in 1613. Their reign came to a crashing halt 304 years later. If you add up the digits of 304, 3 plus 4, you get 7. The Romanovs' fall from grace began with the February Revolution of 1917. Nicholas II officially abdicated the throne on March 2nd, but the revolutionary events that sealed their fate kicked off in that year. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in the October Revolution, which, according to the Julian calendar used in Russia at the time, began on October 25th. But according to the Gregorian calendar used by most of the rest of the world, the revolution began on November 7th. The number 17 is hidden in both dates, 2 plus 5 plus 7, and the 7th of the month. Lenin's famous April Theses, which set the stage for the Bolshevik takeover, were delivered in 1917. But the most chilling coincidence relates to the family's final, brutal end. After being held captive for months, Tsar Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 loyal servants were herded into a basement in the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, they were executed by a Bolshevik firing squad. The date of their murder was the 17th. Even the details of their journey to that basement are marked by the number. The family was taken to the execution site down a flight of 23 stairs, but historical accounts from the guards mention that the family's descent into the cellar felt like a final, fateful walk. The number of steps, combined with the date and the year of the revolution, creates a web of numerical synchronicities that have fascinated historians and mystics for a century. Was it a curse? A simple recurring coincidence? Or just the human brain's tendency to find patterns in chaos? Whatever the cause, the number 17 will forever be linked to the tragic, violent end of Russia's last imperial family.